Good evening. My name is Neil Hetherington. I have the awesome privilege of being the CEO of the Daily Bread Food Bank. Sharing a stage with these speakers and being in front of the elite Walrus audience is certainly testing my nerves tonight, and I'm deeply regretting my spicy garlic chicken shawarma I had for lunch today. Despite my nervousness with the address, I want to come to this podium with a sense of hope. Hope that tonight we can think more about the individuals in Canada who are experiencing food insecurity, the 5.8 million Canadians, and begin to look at the reality that there are solutions ahead. I represent the Daily Bread Food Bank, which provides food for about 200 food programs in the city of Toronto. And we are there because we fundamentally believe that everybody has a right to food. I'm going to speak first in a sort of global context and then bring it home into a Toronto arena and then speak from a personal experience. The Economist recently published its 11th edition of the Global Food Security Index. The index reviews food security among 120 countries and ranks them based on affordability, safety, sustainability, and affordability. And we do all right in Canada. We rank 7 out of 120 countries. Canada owns the podium when it comes to food safety, ranking number 1. But never content with the status quo, what's keeping us from being on the podium in the other categories? And the answer to that is food affordability. Incomes in our country are not adequate nor keeping pace with the cost of food, housing, and other basics. And in this one category, Canada drops to 26, falling behind Qatar and Japan and Australia and 22 other nations. Of course, there are ways that we can combat food affordability. For example, as a nation, we are disastrous when it comes to wasting food. According to Second Harvest, we waste $50 billion worth of food each year in this country. But maybe our food is too expensive because labor is too expensive. And I would say the answer to that is absolutely not. 8 of the 10 worst paying jobs in our economy are within the food sector. There is a lack of justice when it comes to our foreign worker program, and fundamentally, we know that behind every cheap price is cheapened labor. So instead of just looking at how we can drive down costs, on the supply side of things, I'd like to take a different approach to the problem. 7 minutes doesn't mean I get a lot of time to talk about policy, but I will say that there are 3 categories that we at the Daily Bread advocate for on a daily basis, and that is the development and preservation of decent, affordable housing, the movement away from precarious employment, and finally, decent income supports for those, particularly those on disability. So on the local level, and what we've been experiencing in Toronto, I'm going to bring you back a few years. Prior to the pandemic, we were seeing 60,000 clients per month at the food bank. When the pandemic hit, that number doubled, and 120,000 client visits were recorded every single month during that difficult time because there was a lack of resiliency to that acute economic shock. Before I tell you the third chapter of the growth in client visits, I want to pause for a second and just remind you, just as we heard closing our eyes, and remind you of that time just after the lockdown, when we were all coming together and we were clanging pots and rallying our essential workers. And we had this sense of righteous indignation when we were all shocked by how quickly the lineups outside of food banks were. And everybody, and I'm sure everybody in this room, was saying, we cannot have this happen again. Indeed, we need to build back better. Those lineups outside of food banks were a wake-up call for our country. But it's not a wake-up call if we simply go back to sleep. And we did go back to sleep. We let all 3 levels of government press the snooze button. We did not and have not built back better. So here's the third chapter in that brief history of the Daily Bread Food Bank and our client visits. The third chapter opens up in January of this year, where we were serving 120,000, and then a new shock to the system, inflation, and that number skyrocketed to 186,000 visits this past month, precisely because we made the choice not to act and make systemic changes to housing, income, and employment. And finally, I want to talk about the face of those who are food insecure. And I'm going to talk about my friend Bobby. Bobby and I have been friends for 35 years. He has serious health challenges, which limits his ability to drive the majority of his income from employment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about his income. You know, in a Walrus talk, you're not allowed a PowerPoint, and so I'm going to do the next best thing. Bobby is allowed to spend $521 in Ontario on housing. And for everything else, he's given an additional $705. That means he gets a total, this is the PowerPoint, nonprofit style, he gets a total of $1,227. Now, the average rent in Toronto for a bachelor apartment is $1,225. Food for one person is $320, and a discounted bus pass is $112. So that means his total expenses are $1,657. He has a monthly deficit every single month of $430.52. And that makes the assumption, the ridiculous assumption, that he's not going to buy clothes, no entertainment, no television, no internet, no cell phone, no utilities. The poverty line in Toronto is about $2,200 per month. And as you can see, in Ontario, we legislate that anybody on disability needs to be and must stay in poverty. And fundamentally, that goes against each of the values that I know we espouse in this room. Daily Bread has taken our policy recommendations, those 3 policy recommendations, and had them tested. Because we knew that there was a problem, we articulated the problem, we knew that there were solutions, we articulated those policy solutions, and then we went to Dr. Kneebone at the University of Calgary and we asked, what would the impact be of each of these policy levers? And what came back was common sense, that if you increase minimum wage by $1, in Ontario there'll be 187,000 less food bank visits. If you increase Ontario disability by $15 a month, there will be some 275,000 fewer visits across the province. We know the problem, we know the policy, we know the impact that it can have. And so now everybody in this room and everybody online has an opportunity and has a choice to make. And that fundamental choice is, we can be content that there are 5.8 million Canadians who are food insecure. We can be content that the Daily Bread Food Bank is going to continue to serve 186,000 clients every single month. We can be content that Bobby is legislated to live in poverty. Or we can be a collective voice for good and remind each level of government of their poverty reduction strategies and call on them to implement them. So I'm going to finish with a very simple question. I'd ask that everybody in this room raise your hand if you are not going to advocate for change. Well, it's unanimous, so thank you very, very much.